Good afternoon or evening, depending on where you're at. Good afternoon, class. Welcome to week 7 in CU 122. Chef Suzanne and I welcome you to another fine live session. Uh, Rock on. We had a great submission rate this past week. Fantastic job, everybody. Hopefully we can beat that number a little bit this coming week. This is always kind of a rough time in the course once we get into the second half. I think occasionally people will kind of put the brakes on and kind of slow down, but you're a long way from being over. Keep it up. You guys can do it. This class will be over before you know it, but certainly don't get into that mental state of mind of being in the second half. You got to keep it going strong. It's something we deal with in the restaurant industry. The first plate that goes out at 5 p.m. has to be exactly the same as the last plate that goes out at 10 p.m. So you've got to keep that stride going throughout the entire course. But other than that, fantastic job. We've had a good job with attendance so far. Make sure you stay on top of that. It's really critical because what happens every time that we have to start looking for people to make sure that you're doing okay, that takes time away from a student that needs help. So please make sure you continue to work on that attendance and keep it up at least every 4 days. Week 6, Chef Suzanne and I were very impressed. I took a look at a couple assignments that I was thoroughly impressed at, and I'm very excited to get Chef Suzanne's feedback. Chef Suzanne?
Well, the first thing I will say is I was actually kind of amused. I'm a big fan of Scooby-Doo. So I did see a lot of, when I start reading the narratives, I'd see things like, I was afraid of making biscuits. I was afraid of the muffins. And so the first thing I think is Scooby-Doo. And I just, in my mind, picture y'all running away from biscuits like, oh no. So it just cracked me up. So don't be afraid. Y'all will be just fine. So don't fret over these things. I also did see, I hate baking. I don't like baking. So open your minds that you'll do just fine with these items. So don't be scared and don't be nervous and don't be stressed out. Take it for exactly what it is. Yet another technique, right? It's just another technique. For the most part, the assignments I've seen, I'm still grading, but for the most part, they looked great. I saw such nice work. I actually did send out additional messages, but didn't hear back because I was hoping my PowerPoint would be a little larger, but some of y'all didn't get back to me, but that's okay. But there was a lot to choose from this week because there was just some beautiful muffins and beautiful biscuits this week. Yeah, they rocked it this week.
That is awesome. I was reflecting upon Kenneth Hall down there this past week. I had to give a talk at Hyatt, and we were talking about regional foods. And I remember last week, Kenneth Hall, biscuits. He brought up a comment about that, and we were talking about that during this talk at Hyatt, and man, people get really defensive about their particular biscuits. It's a very regional food, and I really love that association of passion and food, and I think that's what brings us all together. Because
I agree. I saw the same thing where I would see, because theoretically almost everybody used the same recipes, and I would see needs more sugar, needs way more sugar, or too much sugar, doesn't need any sugar. So it was actually funny, and I think it was a lot to do with, like you said, the very personal, very regional biscuits. Not so much the muffins, those biscuits, they'll get you.
Oh, I know down in Mexico, we'll go to someone's house and we'll eat pozole, and it'll be a fantastic pozole. It'll be the best, but I'll have to look at my wife and say, well, it's not as good as yours, And it's that connection that we all have. Or fried chicken, I think, is the same way in the South, where people, everybody's mother makes the best fried chicken. And don't say anything bad about it in between there. So I think that's one of the most motivating, passionate things about our industry, and it's something that makes it really fun. So, always cherish that because sometimes that's the stuff that keeps us going. So,
I wholeheartely agree. I have my PowerPoint I want to share real quick.
Sure, go for it.
Not very large. Is my screen up there?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Hopefully I didn't have any spelling issues. Now, I actually took these. These are actually pictures straight out of the video.
Mm-hmm.
so that everyone can see, you know, because we did have some issues. So make sure that if y'all are running into some struggles, make sure you're watching these videos that are in your resources, because there are some great instructional videos that are literally made using the exact same recipes that you will be using. The same with this here too. This is Chef Ann making the blueberry muffins to kind of give you an idea. But here's where some of our rock stars that got a hold of me, because some didn't get a hold of me,
Wow.
really nailed this week. Virginia does not go small. She goes big with her presentation, which I love. Monique is an example of sometimes less is more. And I saw this, and this is one of those where I was like, oh, I really, really do think I want a biscuit, but I want somebody else to make it like Monique. I don't want to make my own.
That's the kind of biscuit you just want to reach into the screen and take a bite of it and put it back.
Yes. And so, and I felt this way with a lot of these images. And so here, this kind of falls in with what we're talking about with Kenneth. We're very regional types of biscuits, you know, so some folks make their biscuits a lot sweeter and serve them with sweet items, or make them not sweet and serve them with the sweet items like the berries and the whipped cream. So I thought this was an interesting use of the biscuits also. But we cannot forget the beautiful muffins that were made this week.
Gorgeous.
Right? And the inside of her muffins looked really delicious too, so I had to use 2 of her photos. And Bethany, hers was a great example of her biscuits definitely rose. She did not have an issue with her biscuits doubling in size.
Great leavening there.
Yeah, you could see that from a mile away.
Uh-huh.
And this one actually, you know, sometimes a bowl of muffins just looks so good. I saw it and I was like, that is hilarious. It's just a bowl of muffins and I want a muffin.
Jacqueline Barone, bowl of muffins. I love that.
Just a bowl of muffins. And I was like, yeah, I totally got to have a muffin out of a bowl. So anyway, but there, like I said, there was others that didn't get a hold of me in time, and that's okay. I will, you know, I'll try and get them out early enough that the requests out that I can get some new folks in my PowerPoints.
Yeah.
But excellent job this week. I had such a good time looking at these photos. They make me smile.
I love the creativity this class is displaying. And for those of you that are applying the creative effort to your food, make sure that you take pictures of it today, because creativity when it comes to garde manger work and presentation work is an evolution. And as you progress in this industry, your presentations are going to be radically different at the end than they were at the beginning. When I used to garnish plates many, many years ago, back in the late 80s, early 90s, I had one style of presentation, but throughout my travels and working with other chefs and everybody else, it really morphed and changed. And you know, it's really neat to be able to track that as you're going throughout your career. So I highly recommend taking pictures and also keeping a diary of where you're at today, or where you were at yesterday and where you're at today, because oftentimes that becomes a motivating factor. We all begin to feel a little bit stale every now and then, where we're not progressing as much as we think we should be. But sometimes when you look in that diary and you say, hey, 6 months ago, I couldn't hold a knife, man. And now, you know, today I'm garnishing plates. I mean, I just looked at some killer photos right there. And, you know, it's a good way to keep you motivated and keep you going. So great job, everybody. Excellent work. Let's take a look at week 7 as we move forward. We are officially in the second half of the course. So everybody needs to keep their legs going. Don't throw the towel in. You need to keep moving forward. If anybody's concerned about where they're at currently in the course, make sure you get a hold of us. Chef Suzanne and I are going to do everything we can to help you out. So we are on your side. Please continue to work on posting attendance. Most of you have done fantastic. Few of you need to get on the bus. When you fail to post attendance on a regular basis, it takes valuable time from other students who need assistance. So if anybody needs help with that, certainly reach out, ask us. All you have to do is go onto the class page, watch a live session archive, complete a knowledge check, or submit an assignment. So we would appreciate that. And then something else Chef Suzanne and I would like to discuss with you, which is item number 3. it's very important for the next several weeks that we do not deviate from our recipes. Our goal is that you learn the technique and the outcome is based on the technique. And it's critical, especially when we're going through this baking thing. I know we had a few instances with muffins where the people didn't care for blueberries, so they substituted X, Y, and Z, and then the muffins don't come out quite the way they should. And that happened on several different instances here with this past week. And the recipes, all they do is predict the outcome. And all they do is they show that you learn the technique, and that is our most important concern. So please do your best to stick to the recipes as closely as possible. And we also know that there are certain things that some of us don't care for, certain foods or certain flavors. As a chef, you really got to put that to the side, because guess what? You're going to be tasting a lot of things over the next couple of years that sometimes aren't so great, but your customers think are fantastic. You need to have the flexibility and the open-mindedness in that area. So you just might find that you like it. Any questions about that? Anybody? Cool. Let's move on to our week 7. Oh, there he is. There's a first appearance today, or second appearance rather, the Cookie Monster. And it looks like, is he on the Good Morning America show there? Chef Suzanne?
I'm not 100% sure. I just thought it really seemed to fit in with this particular slide. So that was really important to me while I was finding Cookie Monster photos.
I think at one point in time he was interviewed by Katie Couric, if I'm not mistaken, and that was a pretty big deal. So
that's a really random fact to know, Chef. Just throwing that out there. It's pretty random.
Well, I've got this thing for Sesame Street. I mean, it's just important. I mean, anything that involved food of that nature. Yeah, there was dumpster diving to eating high caloric foods on that show. I loved it. All right, ladies and gents, taking a look at week 7 here in CU 122. Research materials this week are really critical to help you out with the knowledge check. The research materials this week have a lot of very valuable information about multiple different cooking methods, the effects of sugars, the effects of fat. So please make sure that you read and you understand them. So your first knowledge check is based upon those research materials. And then the week 7 knowledge, conversion knowledge check, we'll get to here in just a moment. Don't take the knowledge checks lightly. You will be referring back to them continuously throughout your career. These little things, the knowledge checks, the conversion knowledge check, the narratives, all these little things that are kind of thorns in your side, guess what? When you get into industry, you're going to be that much further ahead of the person next to you, and that's the whole point of going to school, because you can now do these things that the other people can't. So week 7 live session, thank you very much, everybody, for being here. And if you're not, make sure you watch the live session archive, but you wouldn't know that because you're not here. In the kitchen this week, cookies and pie dough. Chocolate chip cookies are something near and dear to my heart. I spent years running a DoubleTree, a very large DoubleTree hotel. We produced over 15,000 cookies a month. So it's something that I'm kind of keen on. So make sure you get this one right. Flaky pie dough as well, which is a critical element in a successful pie. I sent this out earlier today to everybody, and I hope everybody got a chance to take a look at it. Today, attend or watch the live session, read research materials, complete both knowledge checks tomorrow, read assignment and recipes, create prep list, timeline, and purchase ingredients on Friday. That is an element that is essential to success. Chef Suzanne and I have noticed that a couple of folks have had challenges with some of the recipes. And 99.9% of the time, it's because the recipes are not followed correctly. And it's a difficult habit to get into. And the reason you need to get yourself into that habit is because, number 1, it creates consistency. Number 2, it creates profitability. And number 3, when you're in industry, you're going to be after your culinary staff to be doing the same thing. So learning to follow recipes is essential. And remember, you don't know more than the recipe. Right? So keep a focus on that. On Saturday and Sunday, prepare and complete your assignment. Check to ensure that assignment is correct and submit assignment, right? So what you want to do after you complete your assignment, just go through that list and just go check, 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 check. And this way, when Chef Suzanne gets it, she's like, wow, this person rocks. And then make any changes to assignment as suggested and resubmit on Monday and Tuesday. And traditionally, Chef Suzanne would have put eat cake on Monday and Tuesday as well. But due to the recent pool injury, I think she was unable to accommodate. So.
That's too funny. We do have a hand up. Kenneth he had his hand up, then he took it down, but I think he's reconsidered and he's now got his hand up again.
Kenneth, what's up?
All right, Chef, you work for DoubleTree. If
Yes.
anyone knows DoubleTree chocolate chip cookies, they are divinely the best chocolate chip cookie in the world. So my question is, do you have that recipe?
No, I don't. No, I don't. And it's kind of it's kind of funny when you get up into upper management, and I think everybody in this class, I see a lot of you headed that way. You oftentimes have to sign non-compete clauses, which doesn't allow you to do that. But you're right; those cookies are heavenly at DoubleTree Hotel. At least the first 7,000 are great, but by the time you get up to that 15,000 mark towards the end of the month, they're getting a little old. Yeah. So moving on to our culinary conversion chart for this week. I took the test a little bit earlier, the knowledge check, the conversion knowledge check. All the information's right here, all the answers. Remember, ladies and gents, that on your conversion knowledge check and your regular knowledge check, you can take those as many times as you like, and only the highest score will stick. And currently we have a picture of the Cookie Monster looking at an iPhone, and I'm sure he's reading the recipe, so that's very, very important. All right, ladies and gents, each week we try to share with you a little bit of professional equipment that we work with in the kitchen. So once you're in, you have a little bit of a better understanding. So this week we've put together a couple of items that are essential for this exercise. Sheet pans, we've shown these to you before, but you will be very, very familiar with sheet pans here shortly. They come in a full size, half size, and a quarter size. And then silicone mats or slip mats, they're also called, are becoming extremely popular. They are a replacement for parchment paper, and you just wash them and reuse them once again. Parchment paper is something that we use tons of. You might find it under Quinlan liner or pan liner is what they're also called. It goes on top of your sheet pan. It keeps your sheet pans clean so you don't have to scrub them. And it also provides easy release of baked products. So make sure you get in the habit of using those. You will see a lot of parchment paper over the next couple of years. This is a paddle. Most mixers have multitudes of different attachments, from whisk to paddles. This week you're going to be working with the paddles when it comes to the cookie recipe. And then to portion out cookies, if we don't do them in logs, we will use ice cream scoops in the kitchen. You want to use a smaller 1 or 2 ounce scoop for this week's exercise. What that does is that creates consistency. As you're panning your cookies this week, you want to make sure all of your cookies are the same size, because what that does is that ensures even cooking time. Because if you do a big one right in the middle and you do a bunch of little ones on the outside, guess what? Okay, measuring cups are very, very different in the commercial kitchen. We don't use those little Pyrex thingies too often because of the fact they are glass and they do shatter. So in industry, we use a lot of Cambro style containers, and we have 1 gallon, 1 quart, pints, cups. So you will see these quite a bit. And the odd thing, they didn't start putting numbers on measuring cups until recently in the commercial kitchen. Do you remember that, Chef Suzanne, from years ago? We used to use those metal or aluminum 1 gallon measuring.
It just had the lines.
yeah, that just had lines. And so for those of us that grew up in the business, we had no numbers. I mean, the restaurant industry is a little slow to adapt, and the numbers are kind of recent. So you guys are the next generation. You're awfully lucky. I can't tell you how many times I walked around and says, "Is this a quart?" Isn't that right, Chef Suzanne?
Yes. I'm going to real quick, we've had a good conversation over in the chat box, but for anybody that's not watching it, it is definitely something to be aware of. This week's recipes are in grams, not ounces. So if you haven't already taken a look at it, and I've had at least a couple people verify that your scales do have a setting to adjust to grams. If you, for whatever reason, you don't have the scale or you haven't had to get a new scale, you absolutely will have to do the conversions for it. So the extra conversions. So I just didn't want to forget to mention that because I don't, you may have had that in your slide. I can't remember. I was too busy adding Cookie Monsters.
Yes, ladies and gents, and as the industry progresses, like I was just saying, we're starting to see a lot more of the metric system. And as an older chef, I prefer to be working with the metric system. It is so much more precise and so much more efficient and so much easier to understand than our traditional English measuring system. So, you know, start getting used to it and start familiarizing yourself with it. It'll make life so much easier. I remember, you know, I worked in the United States for a number of years, and then I ended up taking a position in the Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago. I was running the Crown Plaza Hotel, and everything's in grams. And then I ended up working in San Miguel and Guanajuato. Everything's in grams. And it took a little while to get used to, but it's much more efficient in the long run. So great point. Stand mixers, very common. You'll see these throughout the kitchens. This device right here is called a dough hook. That's what we make breads with to develop glutens. Do not make cookies with it. Not effective. And then I think I got everything else up. Oh, then we have the Cookie Monster here displaying his recent batch of cookies. Any questions about cookies?
We do have a question in the chat box that if they do not have a mixer like that, what can they use instead?
Yep. You can use, you can do it with your hands, or if you have an electric mixer, a handheld mixer, that is a good idea for the first part of the recipe, which is referred to as the creaming method. It does help incorporate air. However, if you use room temperature butter, you can create that cream with a whisk. It will work.
I will add this. I actually broke my stand mixer a few weeks ago, and my husband ran to the corner, to the Family Dollar, and got me one of those little handhelds. It was like $8. So just FYI, it's there. It worked beautifully. Matter of fact, I was getting stuff all over me because it was working almost too well. So Family Dollar, $8.
Yeah. Those are particularly effective for this week's assignment. The first part of making cookies, and you know, I know we're smiling and we're kind of laughing about the Cookie Monster, and this is kind of exciting making these cookies, but it's very serious, the technique, and you really have to learn that creaming method, which we're going to get into here in a minute. And an electric mixer makes a much better finished product. So great question, by the way. I know this week, Chef Suzanne and I talked about this already today. Pastry flour is being called upon once again, and I know that several students had some concerns or challenges finding pastry flour over the weekend for this past assignment. For this week's recipe, if you're unable to find pastry flour, you can substitute all-purpose flour, but you want to be cautious as not to overdevelop your glutens. The amount of protein found between pastry flour and cake flour is pretty minimal. They're pretty close to one another. If you're really particular, you can take all-purpose flour, 1 cup, and add 1 tablespoon of cornstarch, and they say that's like a good substitute for pastry flour. However, if all you have is all-purpose flour, you're going to be perfectly fine. Life will be good. Marshall, what's going on? Marshall. What's up?
It's good to be back. I know that much.
Welcome back.
Yeah. been a long month.
Welcome home, man.
Yeah. Like I got some White Lily, the baking flour. Could I be able to use that instead of the all-purpose flour?
Baking flour. Are you
Yeah.
familiar with that, Chef Suzanne?
I actually am. I think that is closer to pastry flour. I've seen it before from some of the vendors that I've worked with, and I think that was the closest thing. And also, I feel like there's another name for it also. They have such weird names for some of these things, like industry names, or like, you know, they just like make some of this up as they go along, I think.
Yeah. Big Yield is another one. Yes. But that's a bread flour. So it's pretty unusual. That's a great question that you have, Marshall, because the names that we use in the commercial professional industry are a lot different than what you use in the retail industry. So if I were you, I would recommend Googling that, trying to find out what that's closest to make sure. If it's an all-purpose, go for it. If it's a pastry flour, perfect, great job. But if it's a Big Yield or high yield flour, then you're going to want to avoid that, because that is something that's going to be high in gluten for breads.
I did Google it, and that's what came up when it came to like a substitute for the pastry flour, and also where to buy it, and also too.
Okay, it sounds like you're on the money then. Sounds like you're good.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, Marshall. So if you are going to use all-purpose flour this week, you just want to bring your ingredients together, and then that's it. No over mixing, because the more that you mix it, the more the glutens that you're going to develop. So you need to be very, very gentle. These are some examples down here of some cookies that we would rather not see this week. Chef Suzanne and I would rather avoid this. This is what happens when you don't do the proper creaming method, and your stuff will separate. Chef Suzanne, what were you going to say?
I think we've all seen those cookies, the one you just kind of circled. Like we've all been to somebody's house and they made Toll House cookies, and you were like, oh, these are different. It's flat with little chunks of weirdness. Okay, cool. And now you know what it is they did to those cookies that made them look that way. So it cracks me up, because I swear I've seen those cookies at all sorts of different family functions.
Yeah. So you need to be really careful about following this week's recipe and the instructions that we're going to give you here over the next few minutes. I mean, some of these are spread way out. That could be poor measurement on the sugar, or over mixing as well. I think we've all had kind of a chewy, dry cookie before. And this is just a basic technique that needs to be mastered. So make sure that you pay very, very close attention to this week's recipe. And if you take a look at these cookies right here, cookies need to leaven slightly. So the leavening agents in the cookies are going to be butter, egg, and baking soda traditionally, or baking powder. And these are leavened very, very nicely. They're not to rise too much or too little. So try to avoid your cookies right there. If you follow the recipe exactly this week, that's not going to happen. Any questions about the flours? No? I threw this next slide in. It is, we had this slide last week as well. We're not going to go through it, but this is just for your general information, because we did receive a lot of messages over this past weekend. And I think if you take a look at this, it'll kind of help explain about substitutions and what's going on with the flour a little bit better. And it explains the difference between the flours. The big number that you're looking at to identify the difference between the flours: cake and pastry flour, 9% protein. All-purpose flour is between 9 and 11% protein, and bread flour is between 11 and 13% protein. So that should help you, give you the education or the information you need to be able to make a decision. Remember that there's two proteins found in flour, gliadin and gliadin, and those two proteins, when mixed, create what we call gluten. And the more that you mix the flour, the more glutens that you are going to develop. And I think I mentioned this last week, but if you want, you can make some dough, just some water and flour, mix it for a long time in your mixer, take it to your sink and wash it underneath your faucet, and you'll be left with what looks like rubber bands, and those are actually strands of gluten. So this week we want to develop a minimal amount of glutens. Very, very important. Any questions about that?
Chef, we really haven't talked about it, but I know that it's come up in some of the assignments, or some folks sending messages about whole wheat flour, which we haven't really talked about, but that's even higher in protein than, say, the all-purpose or even the bread flour. So when y'all are wondering, well, can I substitute whole wheat? Yes, but it's going to be much tougher of a product. And so, if you're making maybe like a pizza dough, that might be great. But if you are trying to make biscuits like we just made, or muffins, then you can see why such a high protein amount. Because what is whole wheat, like 14 or 15%?
Even a little bit higher than that, because what they do, if you look at a kernel of corn, it's got the husk, and that's in the whole wheat, and it's got the bran, which is in the whole wheat. And then on the very center of the kernel, they have what's called the endosperm. And the endosperm is almost solid protein, and that goes into the whole wheat flour mixture. So when you go to mix whole wheat flour, 99% of the time you'll see that in some type of bread type application, because that has that whole high protein content. So you really want to avoid that whole wheat flour for this week's recipe, if at all possible. Does that make sense, Chef Suzanne?
It sure does. We do have a couple of hands up. I just wanted to throw that out there because I was wondering if somebody may ask.
Who has a question? I don't see anybody on my end.
Donald has his hand up.
Donald, what's up?
Yeah, I had noticed that when you had that list of flours up, that pastry flour and cake flour are basically the same.
Yes.
True?
Yes.
So using cake flour in lieu of pastry flour would work?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I can't find anything labeled. I've seen cake flour, but I wasn't aware that they were the same or very similar.
They're virtually the same flour. In industry, we do have some pastry flours that are going to be a little bit lower in protein content, but it's not going to be anything noticeable. It's something that we use in what we call laminating process when we're doing puff pastry doughs and that type of thing. But at this point in time, we don't need to be worried about that. So, good question, though. Thanks for bringing that up, Donald.
Ronald also has his hand up.
From Donald. Ronald, what's up?
Hi, Chef.
Hi.
Quick question. My challenge is with the mixing. Like, to me, it's like a thin line between over mixing and under mixing. Because like I feel like I'm mixing, and then I don't want to mix too much. I don't want to get it my batter to be smooth. But at the same time, if I don't, I find that the flour is still like bubbling inside, and if I cook it, I still have the raw flour inside my mix. And if I go a step further, then it becomes too much.
Okay, so if you refer back to last week's video, sifting will resolve a lot of those issues as far as getting your flour incorporated. When it comes to making muffin batter, or even pie crust like we are going to this week, it's okay to have some minor lumps. The cookie dough, you do want to incorporate as much as you can, but incorporate it slowly. After the creaming method, you could actually fold in the flour with a spoon to ensure that you've got all the lumps out of there, and that will help eliminate it. With mixing, remember, it's okay to undermix a little bit. It's not okay to overmix. So if you feel as though there's some micro bumps in there, that's okay. Let it go. You're going to be all right. But what happens when you overmix, you can't reverse.
That's exactly what I did. I did the opposite. Because I saw the lumps and I saw some flour in there, so I just went for it. And then it was like, okay, smooth, nice. It was nice and silky.
It's hard to hold back, man. But you give your spoon to somebody else and walk away, and you'll be okay. Yeah.
That's good.
All right. Thanks, Ronald. Good question, though. Good question.
Thank you.
Adrian, what's up? Adrian Terry.
Yes, Chef.
Hi, Adrian.
Hey, I had a question. My my preference for cookies is more of a chewy cookie. So along those same lines, should I follow the recipe for my first batch and then for my second batch? As I was reading the required reading, I was reading where if you use brown sugar, you would get more of a chewy cookie. So for my actual kitchen assignment, would it be best just to follow the recipe and go for whatever afterwards?
Absolutely. Yes, please. Yes, please. What the brown sugar does is brown sugar is a combination of white granulated sugar and molasses. And molasses is a byproduct of making the white granulated sugar. But as it heats, it does create a syrupy viscosity that does give you that chewiness in the cookie. So absolutely. But great question, Adrian. Just make sure you follow this week's assignment to the T, and we'll be in good shape.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Adrian. Isaac, what's up?
Hello, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I just have one question. When I was doing the muffins, I know we might have moved a little further, but when I was doing the muffins, that my blueberries kind of like sunk to the bottom. Like when I had blueberry muffins before, they kind of like spread it out, but they just went to the bottom. I don't know what did I do wrong, or I used the bread flour and the all-purpose flour, the unbreaked, but I don't know what happened, and it didn't taste sweet, didn't taste like it had sugar in it or nothing. Like I needed to add more sugar, but I added more sugar, but I don't know what I did wrong, and I don't want that to happen to the cookies. Like the cookies might end up showing like the picture you just shown.
That won't happen with the cookies. Most likely what happened with your blueberries, I'm not sure if you toss the blueberries in flour or not, but a lot of times what happens is the moisture content in the blueberries, if you don't have that extra flour around the blueberries, will force it to drop as well. And it can also come from under mixing. Chef Suzanne, what's your feedback on that?
Definitely. I don't think the recipe actually called for the flour for the berries to be tossed in flour. It's actually kind of funny that Ronald was just talking about over mixing versus under mixing. And when it comes to blueberries like that, if you over mix, they can sink. If you under mix, they can sink. So that's where having that mixture
fine line.
Right? There's such a fine line. Ronald is absolutely correct. But next time, try tossing them in a little bit of flour, and that'll kind of help hold their spot. And also make sure that your measurements are correct. Because if your batter wasn't quite right and it was too thin or it was overworked, then they're definitely going to sink. Because it needs that kind of thicker, heavier batter to kind of hold them in place.
So what I'm thinking is maybe that I didn't have that cold enough butter. That's what I'm thinking.
I don't know that would be the culprit.
Well, the butter in the
for the biscuit. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. For the biscuit, because my biscuit didn't turn out right either. So I did it right, but I think it was just my biscuit. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's not. You know what? And I'm so glad you're bringing this up, Isaac. And it so many of us, when you really have to follow these recipes exactly to the T, even after 38, 39 years in the kitchen, I still follow some of these recipes exactly to the T, because baking is such a science and it's all done on such exact measures. So one little variation of something, too much baking powder, too little baking soda, under mixing, over mixing, development of glutens, all of these things, if you mix one wrong, the other one goes wrong, and then it's just a domino effect. So that's a great example of what you're talking about. When it comes to measuring as well, and I think this might have been a challenge for a couple of people, you need to take your measuring cup. If it calls for 1 cup of flour, you're going to fill that measuring cup all the way up. And then you're going to knock the side of that measuring cup with a knife to get all the extra air pockets out of it. And then you're going to take your knife and you're going to go across the top of the measuring cup to have 1 perfect cup of flour. Does that make sense for everybody? I know a lot of us like just to scoop in and just kind of shake it out and level it off a little bit. but that doesn't work properly because 1 cup, you have to knock the side of it with a knife, which gets all the air bubbles out, and then right across the top with the knife to level it off, to be exact. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah. One more question, okay, please?
Sure.
What I was thinking is, like, when I taste it, it don't taste like it's supposed to. So I'm thinking that maybe I should just add a little bit more of this, add a little bit more of that. Do you think I'm wrong, or should I just keep with the recipe? Because that's what I was telling my wife. Maybe I should just go off from the recipe and just go on my own, and then I don't know.
You ever been driving down the street and you're thinking, I'm not going the right way, but
Yeah.
Google Maps is saying keep going?
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of that same thing, and it's really hard to discipline yourself to keep going straight down that road. And I understand you, and I'm smiling because I've made that same mistake many times, and it takes a little bit of time to learn. Just stick exactly to the recipe.
Just more practice. That's all you saying is just more practice, make perfect.
But
right.
it's essential. Just follow it exactly the way it's written. Then when the product comes out, if you don't care for it, it's not sweet enough. It's what is that? Then you can make your adjustments based on what it tastes like.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Isaac.
All right.
Don, what's up? Hello, Don.
Yeah, I had a question. Well, it's kind of back to the biscuits. I was a little confused because, the recipe didn't call for eggs, but on the assignment, when it said to take pictures, it said to show eggs mixed into the mixture.
That was a typo.
Okay.
Yeah.
I actually got rid of that yesterday or day before. I think I was finally able to get that out of there.
Yeah, I did put the milk in there instead and show the picture of it mixed with the milk, but it was like making sure it's like, okay, I know it says eggs on one part and then the other part said with the milk. It was like, okay, maybe we weren't supposed to do the eggs, so I'm kind of glad I followed directions because my biscuits did come out awesome. My family loved them for Mother's Day. I took them to my parents' house and they destroyed them.
That's kind of cool. You know what? It's so important. One of my most favorite chefs is Thomas Keller. And he's got this saying that he loves to cook, and he's a chef because he likes to make other people happy. So when you hear stories about Dawn, that she was just mentioning her family destroyed her biscuits and stuff, that makes you happy, and I think that's a big motivating factor.
It does. I really love people enjoying my food, and that's what really brings the joy to me of cooking. I love to see other people enjoy it, whether it's good criticism or bad criticism. It's a learning lesson and opportunity. And teaching people like, okay, so this is what I'll do next time. So this is what I know what to do and who likes what. So it's like, because I know if you're going to be a chef, you're not going to like everything that you eat yourself. You're not going to like everything that you cook. Other people are going to like things that you're not going to like. So you have to adjust to everybody's taste buds. But
open-minded.
Really did love it, and I was really happy to see that.
You're doing great, Don. You keep thinking that way, you're going to be successful, man. Keep moving forward. Thank you. Miranda, what's up?
Yes, I have a question. Hi, Chef.
Hi.
In reference to weighing things, are we going to be, and it was making it a little off for me, is that you use the grams. Do you if we're weighing by grams and we're using a scale, do you weigh the scale first and then weigh the item, or how do you?
What you're going to do is you're going to put your item, you're going to set your scale to read gram.
Okay.
Then you're going to put your measuring device, whether it be a cup, bowl, whatever you're going to measure your ingredients into, you'll put that onto your scale, and then you're going to hit tare, T-A-R-E, and tare will zero your scale out once again because you don't want to include the weight of your measuring device into the weight of your goods. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that because I'm not used to doing grams. I'm used to pounds and, ounces and things like that. So this is going to be a new challenge for me.
This is good. And I think, you know what, whenever you do, as human beings, whenever we do something new, it's always a little bit more challenging. Mm-hmm. But once you get used to working with grams, you won't turn back.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Miranda. Appreciate the comment. All right, ladies and gents, let's move on to the creaming method. I want to make sure that everybody understands this week. It is the quintessential element in making a good cookie. And the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to take your room temperature butter and you're going to put it into your mixer, preferably a stand mixer. If you don't have one, an electric mixer will work as well. And you're going to cream your butter and your sugar together until it is nice and smooth. Let it go for a couple of minutes, right? You want to make sure that sugar gets nicely worked into that butter, and it is an essential part of a successful cookie. Do not rush through this. If you take a look at this picture down over here, this is nicely creamed butter right down here. So the butter and the sugar are going to cream. And then the next thing you are going to do is you are going to add your eggs. But when you add your eggs to the cream method, add 1 egg, let it get absorbed, then add the next egg and let it get absorbed. Do not just dump all your eggs in there, turn the mixer on high and leave, right? You have to be patient. As you're adding your eggs, you're going to add 1 egg, let it get absorbed, turn it off, get your spatula, scrape the bowl, make sure you've got all the butter off the edge of the bowl and off the bottom of the bowl and off the paddle. Then you're going to turn it back on again, and then you're going to work another egg in, stop, scrape, turn it back on. It will pay off. Adrian, what's your question?
I don't necessarily have a question, but for you guys, when Chef Warren was speaking earlier about using your knife to level off your flour or whatever ingredient you're using, ensure that you use the back side of your knife. I know started cooking at a young age, my grandmother would tell me to do that, but I would always do the opposite, and things would never turn out right. So just ensure that when you're doing that, that you're using the back side of your knife, not your bevel side. Because if you're using your bevel side, it's dipping down in your measuring cup and taking some of your ingredients away.
Yes, good point. Thanks for bringing that up, Adrian. I appreciate that. Yeah, definitely use the back side of your knife. You don't want to be using the sharp side of the knife on anything other than cutting. Very, very important. But going back to the creaming method, if you want to have a lighter cookie, a little bit of a more airy cookie, one that rises up a little bit more, whip that butter and sugar, cream that together for a few minutes to incorporate additional air into it. However, if you don't mix it for an extended period of time, you'll have a little bit of a flatter, more dense cookie. So room temperature butter, sugar, mixing bowl, paddle, whip. Take your spatula, scrape it down, clean off your paddle, make sure there's no chunks of butter on the bottom, let it whip again. 1 egg at a time, let it get absorbed, scrape, clean, then add your other egg. Then you'll add your extract if you're using extract. Once all that gets incorporated, then you can move on to your other items. That is the quintessential step to creating a good cookie. It's very, very important. Also this week, you want to make sure that you are sifting your ingredients. That's also very important. That'll help Ronald with his mixing and over mixing. That also incorporates a lot of air into the product as well. Now we are moving on to the, now that we've got our cookie dough made, make sure that your pans this week, make sure that you use clean pans that are unwarped. You want to make sure that you have parchment paper or silicone on top of your parchment paper, or on top of your pans. Don't add directly. And then if your sheet pan, if you don't have parchment paper and you add a lot of butter like grandma used to do to the sheet pans so they don't stick, that's going to make your cookie spread even further, which is going to create even more of a flat cookie. And then you want, pulling the cookie out of the oven is always kind of the hard part. And that seems where a lot of people struggle with this. To tell if a cookie is done It's done by color. It's not done by touch, smell, look, hey, taste this. Nothing. It's done by color. And you always want to pull it out when the edges begin to brown just a little bit. And you want to pull it out when you think it's not cooked all the way. Because I don't know how else. Chef Suzanne, how else do you describe that?
I didn't know how you were going to say it, but I've always said if it looks done, it's overdone. So just a good habit to get in is if you look at it and you go, oh no, maybe it's not quite done yet, it's probably done because it's going to continue to carry over cook. That residual heat's going to keep it cooking. So I think you phrased it perfectly, Chef.
Yeah. It's like Chef Suzanne just alluded to, cookies and many other foods are very susceptible to carry over cooking. So if you have that cookie in there at 325 or a 350 degree oven, when you pull it out at 350 degrees, it's going to continue to cook and harden. Okay, so you want to make sure when your cookies start to turn a little bit golden brown around the outside, get them out, right? And then the ideal scenario is to let them set for like a minute and then put them onto a cooling rack to allow the air to circulate all the way around them, and that'll help your cookie cool much quicker. When you go to portion your cookies out, the ideal scenario is to use a small ice cream scoop, 1.5 to 2 ounce. Cookie is the ideal size. Make sure they are all the same size. Make sure they're about 2.5 inches, 2 inches apart on your sheet pan. When you get into industry, the chef is going to tell you go 5 by 5 or 5 by 6 on your sheet pans. And what he is talking about would be 6 rows of 5 or 3 rows of 5, whatever the chef tells you to do. So start to get yourself into that habit, and that's how we space cookies out on the sheet pans. Does anybody have any questions about that? No? Good. Let's roll on to the next thing here. We're going to, I have the video in this week's slide presentation for cookies. And I'm not going to show you the video right now because it is on your class page and it will be in the weekly presentation, which will be posted on the class page here in just a few moments. We went through the essential steps of making cookies. So number 1, follow the recipe to the T. Number 2, measure everything exactly. Number 3, creaming method is essential. Make sure that you follow it properly. And then number 4, make sure that you portion out the cookies spaced out well enough. Number 5, pull them out of the oven when they look like they're not done. Is that right, Chef Suzanne? Look like they're not done? Yeah.
I don't really know a better way to say it, but I have to agree. Yeah, they really need to look like they're not quite done. If you're questioning, another 2 minutes probably doesn't need another 2 minutes. So, and actually I will mention that also, because we're kind of talking about ovens a little bit here in the chat also. Every oven is different. So if I'm looking at a recipe and it says, like the chocolate chip recipe says bake for 8 to 12 minutes, I'm going to check my cookies at 4. I'm going to kind of get an idea of what they're looking like. I'm not just going to set my oven for 8 or 10 minutes and walk away. So it's a really good habit to get into is kind of check it out about halfway to whatever that time is. You know, so if this recipe had said 10 minutes, I would check it at 5. Just peek, kind of get an idea of where you're at. Don't just, well, I walked away, I set the oven for 12 minutes and they're burnt too crisp. And that may be an issue with your oven. So you want to make sure to really keep that stuff in mind.
Don't hate, rotate, like we say. Make sure you rotate those cookies. And what we mean by that is you're going to take that sheet pan and you're going to spin it all the way around in your oven, not 360 degrees, but 180 degrees. This way you can expose your cookies to even heat and they all come out at the same time, which is the ideal scenario. Even with our big ovens in industry, we still have to rotate. And like we say, don't hate, rotate. Life will be good. Let's move on to cookie or pie dough here. There's a couple of things with pie dough that are essential. Number 1, you still want to have some chunks of fat in there. That's what creates those layers of flakiness. That's step 1. Number 2, pie dough is extremely susceptible to carry over or to over mixing, right? We want that flakiness. We do not want to develop too many glutens in that pie dough. Otherwise, it's going to be tough and it'll ruin your entire pie. Let's take a quick look here at the flaky pie dough.
For both sweet and savory applications. In pastry, it's obviously used for pies, but it's also utilized for lemon bars, turnovers, and anything else you can wrap in dough. It also has its savory uses like chicken pot pie and spinach turnovers. The process for making pie dough is simple and easy and can even be done by machine if you're making it in bulk. Before you begin to make the dough, gather your ingredients and put them all in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes.
Essential step, heat kills pie dough. Oh my God, okay. Sorry about that.
In pastry, it's obviously used for pies, chicken pot pie, and spinach turnovers, making it in bulk. Before you begin to make the dough, gather your ingredients and put them all in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes. It may seem strange, but this will ensure that the dough will stay cool during the mixing process. After your mise en place has cooled, pour the flour and salt into a large bowl. Just whisking the flour and the salt together just to make sure it's evenly incorporated. We've got our cold butter in small pieces. We're just going to break it up. Again, about the size of a hazelnut, but coating that cold butter in the flour. This is really what's going to make the pie dough flaky. All right. Create a well in the center. And the ice water goes in. You don't need the ice cubes, so hold those back. You can hold off on some of the water too, in case you don't need it all. So again, just scraping around the side of the bowl and inward. This helps make sure that nothing gets missed on the bottom of the bowl or around the sides of the bowl. We have a pretty shaggy dough right now, which is good. We'll just turn it out onto our bench.
Please observe how the dough looks at this point. That is an ideal way that dough should appear. It's barely worked. You notice she didn't work it with her hands. She worked it with the dough scraper because your hands are 98.6 degrees and you're trying to keep that butter cold.
We'll just work it by hand briefly. It's okay for the dough to stick a little bit. You don't want to add so much water that it ends up sticking to the bench or looking soupy. Just press it into a more even rectangle. You can actually still add a little bit more water. Pie dough is pretty forgiving, as a matter of fact, so it's not too late. If you find that you made it and you didn't add enough water at the beginning, when you go to roll it out, you can absolutely add just a small amount of ice water at a time until you get the desired consistency. And then we're going to cover it in plastic wrap tightly. The main reason for wrapping it in plastic wrap, and I wrap mine twice, is you want to keep the air from getting at your pie dough. Air will dry it out, and your pie dough actually might look a little grayish. So we don't want that. So we're just keep the air from hitting it. And then we do want to let it rest. 4 hours or overnight is ideal because we want the gluten to rest. If you try to roll out pie dough right after you make it, the gluten is going to, you're going to roll it out and it's going to snap back at you. It's almost like a rubber band. It's not going to cooperate. So by allowing it to rest for 4 hours overnight, the gluten has a chance to relax. It'll be much more easy to work with. If you have to make the pie the same day, just allow 4 hours for it to rest. Otherwise, it's just as good to use the next day. Now that the dough is wrapped, we're going to allow it to rest for at least 4 hours. Pie dough should be kept in the fridge or freezer until you're ready to use it. If you want to use it within a couple of days, put it in the fridge. Otherwise, freeze it. If you do freeze it.
All right, that's good enough. Thanks, Ann. Okay, now there were a couple of very essential things when it comes to making the pie dough that she did. And if everybody can observe this, life will be good. Number one, she put the dry ingredients in the bowl and she mixed the dry ingredients first, right? So that minimalized her mixing time. Number two, the butter that she added was cold. All the ingredients were cold, but when she added the butter, it was in small pieces. Then she created a well, and then she added ice water. Make sure it is ice water, not cold water, but ice water. And then she used a dough scraper to bring the dough together, which minimalized the mixing. And then when she turned it out onto her cutting board, she used her hands, but minimally, only for about 30 seconds just to bring that dough together. And that's it. Any more than that, you're going to overdevelop your glutens and you're going to end up with a tough dough. So those are the key essential things. And then the refrigeration of the dough, allowing the glutens to relax, is critical. Make sure that dough is wrapped tight. You don't want the oxygen to hit the flour butter mixture, because that's what turns it green, and that can be unsightly to your guest. So you want to make sure, give it about 4 hours to rest in there. When you go to work it, do not work it cold. Bring it out, let it warm up to about room temperature, and then minimalize your rolling. Make sure you flour your work surface, flour your rolling pin, both work surface and rolling pin, and then you'll roll it out to about 1/8 of an inch thick, and then you can roll it up on your rolling pin, pick it up, and then roll it out over your dish. Chef Suzanne?
I will add that we had a couple of eagle-eyed students that noticed that the recipe has them mixing the salt in with the flour, but the book actually talks about dissolving the salt in the liquid. So for this particular assignment, I'm going to say stick with the recipe. Go ahead and put your salt in with your flour, just like it says in the steps. So just be aware, there are multiple ways to do things, but we're going to go ahead and stick with the recipes this week for sure.
That's always been a debatable subject. And you know what? The end product, I've never been able to tell the difference, whether it was dissolved or not dissolved. So that's up to you. And the reason I don't like to dissolve the salt in the salt water, as you remember, she said you could add more liquid or less liquid. So that will affect the saltiness of your product. So just put it into your dry ingredients. This way you know you're on the money and you're in good shape. Ladies and gents, let's take a look at our week 7 assignment page real quick as we get ready to wrap things up here. Chocolate chip cookies. You want to have a picture, your mise en place, ingredients before mixing. Make sure we get a good picture of that creaming method. That's the real important thing. And then you want to see, we want to see pictures of your cookies when they are done. Pie dough, here are all the requirements for this week. Narrative sheet, and then make sure that you check your assignment, check your work against the assignment page before submitting to ensure that you have everything complete. Does anybody have any questions? Anyone? Chef Suzanne, what did I forget to say?
For this week, you're making cookies, so you'll need all the photos of that. You are not making your pie this week. You are just making the crust. Then you're gonna let it sit in the fridge for 4 to 24 hours. Then you're gonna pop it in the freezer, and then you'll use it for next week's assignment. And
next week we'll get into the rolling process. I touched on that just briefly, but this week we're not going to worry about that. You remember Chef Ann during there in the video mentioned that dough can sit in the refrigerator for a period of time. So make sure this week some of the other important information that we discussed, attendance, and make sure that you follow the recipes according to the way that they are written. Please do not deviate. We would appreciate you staying right down the middle. This way we're able to gauge that you have learned the technique, which is the most important thing. And then other than that, I hope everybody has an absolutely fantastic week.
Chef,
and yes.
Did you show my last slide?
Oh, shucks. That would probably be the most.
That was my favorite. And I hate for it to not be shown today.
I agree. I like this one as well. This will be our sign off right here. fitness cookie into my mouth. I'm into fitness. I'm into fitting them cookies in my mouth. That is awesome. I love that. The Cookie Monster rocks. Ladies and gents, have a fantastic week. Any questions, make sure you let us know. We're here to help. I do want to clarify one thing. If you guys need help with your assignments or don't understand something, make sure you reach out and talk to me. If you guys have any questions about your actual grade that you received, make sure you ask Chef Suzanne. That's kind of the way things work here. We're lateral people, but we each handle different little aspects. So I hope everybody has an absolutely fantastic week. Take care.
Bye, everybody.